Hi everybody, welcome to Module 6, Lesson Planning with the new textbooks. In this first video, we will look at some different views of planning a lesson and problems that the teachers might have when they plan a lesson. When people have different views about planning, they will plan the lesson differently. We may plan it in a very detailed way, or we just draft out some key points or teaching notes. What about you? Look at the survey questions on the slide. Tick the boxes that you agree with. Briefly write what you think a lesson plan is. Now, look at some definitions of a lesson plan and compare it with your own definition. What do they have in common? Right, they all have the activities or the description of the procedure that students do to obtain objectives. Some lesson plan will be written with more details as they describe the procedure. Others seem to list the activities only. Do you have any problems when making a lesson plan? Think of the time you spend on planning, the activities in the lessons, unexpected things, etc. Work out some solutions to the problems which some teachers have. Look at the screen and read them. Lesson planning is good, but it usually takes me much time to write a lesson plan. You know, as a teacher teaching English language to 2 classes, I always lack time. Whenever I plan a lesson, I tend to come up with so many activities. The class time is not much, and I don't know what to include and what to leave out. I have been teaching English for only a year, so I find it difficult to allocate proper time to each activity when planning a lesson. Sometimes I make my students a bit bored because of my too long activity. I found myself forced to shift away from what I had planned because my students responded to my instructional activities in unexpected ways. My lesson failed. I have to follow textbook. Every unit has already designed activities, and I found them sometimes monotonous and too easy for my students. So, we can summarize the problems that these teachers have when they plan the lessons. Some of the problems are preparation time, what to include and what to leave out, timing for each activity, anticipating problems, covering the textbook. Some of the problems are preparation time, what to include or what to leave out, timing for each activities, anticipating problems, covering the textbooks. Do you have any other problems? What are the solutions that you think you can help these teachers to get over these problems? Okay, time's up. You can compare your solutions with these ones suggested by some primary school teachers on the next slide. Okay, let's turn to the next slide to see some suggested solutions. The solution might be: teacher can share lesson plans with the other teachers in order to reduce their workload and to spread good ideas. Teacher should allocate proper time for each activity and cut down the time for long activities. Teacher can ask experienced colleagues for help. Teacher should prepare more activities and varied activities. Teacher adapt the activities, choose the ones that suit the lesson objectives and the students' interests. Teacher can also change the order of the activities. So, a teacher should not depend much on the lesson plan, but should be flexible to change the plan to suit situation. There are other things teachers should remember when writing lesson plan. Teacher writes the lesson plan as a teaching tool to help him or her in class, not for show. That is why a lesson plan should include all the information that teacher can't hold in his or her head. Include answer keys, words to pre-teach, clear examples, instructions, checking questions. Let us now look at the main point of today's lesson. First, we look at some definitions of a lesson plan. Then, we share common problems that teachers often face when planning a lesson. Next, we discuss some possible solutions to these problems. We agree with Jim Scrivener. Prepare thoroughly, but teach the learners, not the plan. It means that it is important to plan lessons very carefully. But when teaching, teachers should not depend too much on the lesson plans. Instead, they should be flexible to change the plan to suit the real teaching situation. Now, you can pause this video and go to the link on the slide to see a clip about anticipating problems from ELT.com. Take notes of different kinds of problems and solutions that you hear. Are they useful for you? That's all for today. We will meet again at the second video when we talk about the components of a lesson plan. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome again. This is the third in the series on lesson planning from ELTtraining.com, and today we're going to be looking at anticipating problems. In part 1 we looked at aims and assumptions, part 2 we looked at the procedure, and now we're going to finish off looking at anticipated problems. In some ways this is, one of the most important parts of a lesson plan. But you may be thinking, well, why should I be thinking about problems? In one of the first teacher training courses I ever ran, somebody wrote on their lesson plan, I don't anticipate any problems, which was kind of optimistic and nice. But it's not about thinking things will go wrong. It's about looking at the road ahead of you and seeing what might be difficult so that you can think about how you're going to deal with those situations before they come up. If somebody throws a question at you in the middle of class and you're not prepared for it, it's going to be much harder to answer it. If you thought, oh, this is going to be difficult, this piece of language is tricky, this is difficult to understand, then you're much more likely to be able to give a satisfactory and useful explanation to somebody. So it's really about looking at the road ahead and seeing what's going to be difficult and planning what you're going to do about those things. The other thing, of course, is that you really need to think about the solutions. What are you going to do? Not just what's going to be difficult, but what are you going to do? And remember that those solutions need to be on your lesson plan as well. Okay, so let's look at, before we start, let's look at what isn't an anticipated problem. So something like, I might forget my board pens. Clearly this would be a difficult thing, or they might not understand my instructions. This would also be difficult, but these things are within your control. You can control these, so these aren't things which you need to worry about on your lesson plan. The sort of things that you need to look at are either linguistic or non-linguistic problems. Let's have a look at the non-linguistic problems first. So, for example, there might be things to do with the classroom that are beyond your control. Technology is a good example here. My YouTube video might not play. Now, hopefully you'll have tested out the equipment beforehand, but with the best will in the world, sometimes it doesn't always work. So you need to have a backup plan. What are you going to do if it doesn't work? Have you got something else you can do? Maybe a listening on a tape or a CD or something, or maybe a reading instead. It might be something to do with the learners. Now this might be something to do with circumstances again beyond your control. You may have a learner who is always 10-15 minutes late because she has issues with childcare, for example. She's trying her best, you're trying your best, but you need to think, well, she's going to be this amount late. I'm going to have to work out something so that I can get her up to speed when she comes. It might be something to do with the individual skills of the learners. So it might be that some learners read faster than others. This is particularly common in ESOL type classes where you've got some people who are very literate and some people who are maybe not so literate in the Roman alphabet perhaps. That they might have a similar level of spoken English but their reading may be faster or slower. What are you going to do with the faster finishers? You know, you need to give them something useful to do. Or are you going to give the slower readers a shorter passage, for example? So you need to think about what you're going to do, how these problems will affect your lesson. Of course, the other big thing is linguistic problems. What sort of difficulties are there going to be with the actual language that you're teaching, with the vocabulary or with the grammar that you're teaching? When you're thinking about this kind of thing, you need to think, as always, about meaning, form, and pronunciation. So don't forget these three really important things. The reason that meaning's there on the top and it's bigger is because that's the most important thing. Keep that in mind too. So if you have a look on elttraining.com at the free methodology support section, there's another video on this, on analysing language in terms of meaning, form, pron. So that might be helpful if you're not sure about this. Okay, so what we're going to do is look for what might be difficult. So let's have a look at vocabulary to start with. Now to give an example, here's an example, spinster. Right, so this is an item of vocabulary that you might be teaching for whatever reason in your class. Let's look at the meaning first. What does this mean? Well, clearly it means an unmarried woman. But you also need to think about what might be difficult about this word. If you think about the word spinster, it does mean unmarried woman, but there's more to it than that. It's not just about someone who's unmarried. There are also quite negative connotations here that aren't the same with bachelor, for example. It's also rather archaic. It's not a word we tend to use nowadays. It tends to be something that's in literature perhaps, doesn't it? Maybe because of its negative connotations. But even bachelor, which doesn't have negative connotations, I think is probably dated, if not archaic. So the solution to these kind of problems, these are the problems that learners will have. You know, if I then go out into the world and tell the world that I'm a spinster, that sounds odd. So these are the kind of problems they might have learning this word. And the solution to this is to use concept check questions. So the basic concept check questions are, is it a man or a woman? It's a woman. Is she married? No. But also, is it polite? To which the answer is no, it isn't really polite. People wouldn't usually be happy if they were called a spinster. Is it used very often now? No, it's not. And if not, then what do we usually say? And we'd probably usually say, I'm single, wouldn't you? So these are the sort of things that will help learners to overcome the difficulty, the potential difficulty with that language. So good concept check questions are really what you need here, and that's going to be your solution to this problem. If you want more help on concept checking, again there's a whole video there on concept checking for vocabulary, so that will give you more hints on how to do this. So we've looked at the meaning. The form here is pretty straightforward. There's nothing very difficult about it. It's a countable noun. You know, it needs an article, but there's nothing very difficult about that. Probably learners won't have trouble with that. Pronunciation, you might want to write in the phonemic chart to think about what might be difficult with this, but this actually doesn't have anything that's very difficult. It's got a schwa at the end, but that's very common with ER at the end of words, mother, father, sister. So, you know, that's not something that's going to be difficult. So those things worth thinking about, but actually they won't be the problem with this particular word. There may be other words where, for example, the meaning's fairly straightforward, but the pronunciation is difficult. Here, that's probably not the case. So let's move on and have a look at structures. So grammatical structures is what I mean by this. Again, we need to split it into meaning, form and pronunciation. Let's have an example. Here's an example for you. It's a lovely day, isn't it? You went to Ibiza, didn't you? These are what are called question tags. Now, question tags are a really common feature of the spoken language, and they're really common in other languages too. So let's look at the meaning to start with. As I said, they're common in other languages. It's really common. There's a small piece of language that you add on to the end of a statement that makes it a question. N'est-ce pas in French, je in Swahili, for example. I'm sure you know other languages that have this kind of small linguistic tool. So they're not very difficult from that point of view. The only small potential cloud on the horizon, I suppose, is to check that learners understand whether they're a real question or not, because they can be or not. So that's something maybe to think about. But mostly the meaning here is not a problem. They understand that it turns a statement into a question of some description. So this isn't a problem. The same concept exists in most languages. However, the form of them in English, as opposed to many other languages where they're just one small bit of static language that doesn't change, the form in English is really tricky. So if we've got "it's a lovely day," that's a positive statement, then our tag at the end is negative, isn't it? Usually. Okay, you don't have a dog, this is a negative statement, so our tag at the end is positive. So already we've got changes here. We've then got other changes to do with the verb that's used in the sentence. For example, it's a lovely day, we've got the verb be here, and the verb be is used in the question tag. If we have an auxiliary verb in the main sentence, like don't here, then we use that same auxiliary in the question tag. If we have a modal auxiliary in the main statement, then that's used in the question tag. If we don't have an auxiliary in the main statement, for example here we've got the main lexical verb, no auxiliary, in that case we need to use a dummy auxiliary. In this case didn't, because do is the dummy auxiliary and didn't is the past tense of it. So you can see here that there's so much change here in the form that it's really, really difficult. This is a big problem for learners. So the meaning is not difficult, the concept is very straightforward, but the form is horrible. So then we need to look at what are the solutions to this problem. Well, the first one and the most important thing is to make sure that you analyse the language yourself first. You need to do your research. You need to perhaps look in books to find this out, grammar books or dictionaries if it's vocabulary. Do your research. This will make a big, big difference. Clear explanations. This is what's definitely needed. That will be part of the solution. If you know your stuff, this will be easier. clear examples on the board. It's almost like a mathematical formula, this. There's definitely very clear rules. As long as you can give clear examples, that will help. And of course opportunities, plenty of opportunities for controlled and freer practice. Controlled practice, perhaps them adding question tags onto the end of statements, different statements to different auxiliaries. Freer practice, trying to get them to use it. So this is important, but that first one is really vital. If you know it yourself very well and think about how you can explain it clearly and simply, that's the crux of this. The pronunciation then, we've looked at meaning and form. So the meaning here isn't difficult, the form is difficult. The pronunciation with these is also tricky. So you went to Ibiza, didn't you? The intonation here is up, and it's a real question. But it's a lovely day, isn't it? Is not a real question. I know it's a lovely day, I can see it as much as you can. It's simply a conversation starter, isn't it, really? It's often used to confirm things that we already know or think we already know. And with this one, the intonation is down, isn't it? This is very difficult for learners. It's rare in English that intonation, the change in intonation like this, makes a real difference in the meaning. But here it does. So you went to Ibiza, didn't you? Is different to you went to Ibiza, didn't you? In one of those sentences, I know you did, and the other one, I'm not so sure. So there is a difference in meaning here. And this second one, learners find very difficult. The one that intonates up, they tend to have no problem with. But the one that intonates down, which you listen to people around you, that's the one that people commonly use question tags for. I would say most commonly use question tags for. We use it as a polite way of starting a conversation, or of, including people in a conversation. We use it as a way to get some back channeling on what we're saying. And that's the one they find difficult. So the solution to this is a big problem. Don't underestimate the difficulty of this, particularly that second one. And the solution to this really is lots of drilling. You just have to drill it, get them to hear the difference and get them to say the difference. Lots of opportunities to practice again, of course, that's the big one, and correction, help them if they're struggling. So these are sort of solutions that you can have to these kind of problems. Let's have a look at another grammatical example. I've been on a safari. Okay, so this, as I'm sure you know, is the present perfect for experience. Here, the meaning is something that I've done sometime in the past, non-specified. We don't know how many times, we don't know how long ago it was. It's a general statement of my experience. This is tricky for learners because what they will find difficult is what's the difference between I've been on a safari and I went on a safari. Many languages do not differentiate between these two things, and this is a big problem conceptually. So here the meaning is a big problem. So before we were looking at question tags, meaning isn't a big problem there, the concept's easy. But here the meaning is difficult because this concept, this use of a tense to describe a general experience in the past is often, doesn't exist in other languages always. So this is potentially a very big problem. There are also other uses of the present perfect, so this also is a problem. So the meaning here is key. Solutions to this: concept checking. Do we know how many times I've been on safari? No. Do we know when I went? No. Looking at timelines can help a little bit, although it's, again, I think this is just a difficult one, but timelines can help with many tenses. The opportunity for contrastive practice. So when do we say I went? If we say last year, would we say I went or I've been? We definitely say I went if we use an adverb. So things like that can help, giving them rules such as we don't usually use the present perfect for experience when we have a specific time. That kind of thing can help as well. So, but thinking through what you're going to say when they say teacher, teacher, what's the difference between I went on safari and I've been on safari? That's very tricky. So you need to prepare what you're going to say and how you're going to explain that. The form for this isn't that difficult. It's have plus the past participle. The main difficulties for this are irregular past participles, so you're going to need to make sure that you teach or test irregular past participles, and again obviously give them opportunity for practice. But you know, the form isn't intrinsically that difficult. The pronunciation, we've got a contraction with I have to I've, she has to she's. We've got a weak form of been there. It's not I've been, it's I've been. I've been on safari. So we've got contractions and weak forms there. The solution to this kind of thing, usually with pronunciation, the solution is raising awareness of it and drilling and correcting. But these aren't the main problems with this present perfect thing. The main problem is the meaning. That's the one that's really difficult. So hopefully that's given you an overview of what we mean by anticipating problems. We're looking at the road, both the classroom and the language, particularly the language, I think. We're looking at what is difficult, what's going to cause a problem for the learners, and how can we help them to overcome those difficulties. I hope that's been helpful. There are 2 other videos in this series, Lesson Planning 1, Lesson Planning 2. Hopefully they'll be helpful as well, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much. Bye bye.